I'm Alex, I'm 34 years old, and at my grandfather's will reading, my parents handed my brother a check for $10 million and told me to go earn my own. Before I tell you how a single, sealed envelope from my grandpa changed not just my life, but blew up my entire family, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. Alright, so, picture this. A stuffy lawyer's office downtown, on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that scraped the clouds. The kind of place that smells like old paper, expensive leather, and a quiet, suffocating kind of power. The air is thick and not just from the recycled air conditioning. I'd been dreading this day for weeks, ever since the call came. To be honest, a part of me didn't even want to come. I knew what was waiting for me. It was the same thing that was always waiting for me when it came to my family. A fresh, stinging reminder of my place in the hierarchy. But another part of me, a small, stubborn part that still clung to a sense of duty, told me I had to be there. For Grandpa Walter. So there I was, sitting on a leather chair that groaned every time I shifted my weight, trying my best to just disappear into the upholstery. Across the polished mahogany table, gleaming under the recessed lighting, sat my family. My father, Richard, looking every bit the successful executive in his tailored suit, his posture ramrod straight. My mother, Eleanor, her face a mask of perfectly composed, sympathetic grief that never quite reached her cold, assessing eyes. And my brother, Ryan. Golden boy Ryan, the firstborn, the heir apparent. He had this easy confidence, a smirk playing on his lips like he'd already read the script and knew he was the hero of the story. And in a way, he had been his whole life. The family lawyer, Harold Keene, a kind man with weary eyes who'd known our family since before I was born, cleared his throat. He shuffled some papers, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. I noticed he was avoiding my gaze, and my stomach tightened. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It wasn't a document. It was a cashier's check. My mother, with the swiftness of a hawk, intercepted it. Her manicured nails, painted a blood red, tapped on the corner before she handed it to Ryan with a theatrical flourish. $10 million, darling, she cooed, her voice dripping with a pride so thick it was nauseating. A good start for you. Your grandfather wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Ryan took it, glanced at the number with a practiced nonchalance, and gave a low whistle. He folded it neatly and tucked it into the inner pocket of his blazer. Then, the collective attention of the room shifted to me. My father turned his head, his gaze cold, dismissive. It was the look I'd seen in 1,000 family photos, 1,000 holiday dinners. The look that said, disappointment. The look that said, other. And for you, Alex, he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. Your grandfather and I had many discussions. He agreed with us. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. It's time you made something of yourself. Go earn your own. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy like shards of glass. Go earn your own. As if the last 10 years I'd spent in university labs, earning a PhD in molecular biology, working 80-hour weeks, publishing papers, and pouring every ounce of my soul into my research meant nothing. As if it was all some childish game. Because it didn't result in a stock portfolio or a fancy car. Not the kind of success they understood, it was just a hobby. A failure. My face burned hot. I stared at a spot on the plush carpet, focusing on the intricate pattern, willing the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I could feel their eyes on me, a physical weight pressing down, pinning me to the chair. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? They'd been saying this to me my whole life, in 1,000 different ways. This was just the official notarized version. The meeting was over, or so I thought. Just as my mother was about to stand, ready to lead her triumphant son out of the room, Harold Keene held up a hand. "One moment," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unexpected authority. He reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out something else. A simple, cream-colored envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with a dark red wax stamp bearing my grandfather's initial, W. "Before we conclude," Harold said, his eyes finally meeting mine and holding my gaze, Walter left one final instruction, sealed, and to be opened only after the initial assets, as stipulated in the primary will, were distributed. The smirk on Ryan's face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. My mother's smile tightened at the edges. The smug, victorious atmosphere in the room evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp tension. And suddenly, no one was looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking with a flicker of something else. Something I hadn't seen in their eyes in a very, very long time. Fear. As Harold Keene held that envelope, the silence in the room stretched and became a living thing. It was filled with the unspoken questions, the sudden anxieties. My family stared at that simple paper rectangle as if it were a bomb. And in that silence, my mind did what it always does when I'm cornered. It ran. Not out the door, but back in time to the archives of 1,000 tiny cuts that had led to this moment. A memory, sharp and vivid as if it were yesterday, hit me. I'm 12 years old. I'm standing in a cavernous high school gymnasium that smells overwhelmingly of floor wax, sweat, and teenage anxiety. It's the regional science fair. I'm standing next to my project, a 3-foot-tall, painstakingly accurate model of a DNA double helix, which I'd spent 3 solid months building in our garage. Every single nucleotide base was hand-painted. I had a little motor that made it rotate. I loved that thing. I had won first place. I remember the weight of the thick, blue ribbon in my hand, the crisp new $20 bill the judges gave me, and a pride so big it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. My parents and Ryan showed up an hour late. My dad, looking at his watch, walked over, glanced at my project, and nodded once. "Huh, what's this thing for, son?" he asked, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. "It's DNA, Dad," I'd said, my voice deflating. "It's the blueprint for all life." "Right. Good, Alex. Now where's the snack bar? I'm starving." My mom was busy fixing Ryan's collar. He'd won a little plastic honorable mention trophy for a soccer tournament his team had placed fourth in. He hadn't even scored a goal. But that didn't matter. They spent 20 minutes taking pictures of him from every conceivable angle, him grinning, holding up his trophy. They took one of me, but only after I asked, my voice small. In the photo, I'm holding my blue ribbon, but I'm not smiling. You can see Ryan in the background, leaning against the bleachers, looking profoundly bored. That was my life. A background character in the Ryan Whitman show, a show I had never auditioned for. Then another memory, darker and colder, pushed its way to the surface. My grandfather, Walter, was my person. He was the one who bought me my first real microscope, not a toy one. He'd drive out to visit me at college, and we'd sit in some greasy diner for hours, him drinking black coffee, me talking a mile a minute about my latest organic chemistry class. He'd listen, his brow furrowed in concentration, asking smart questions, making me feel like my passion wasn't weird or a waste of time. He made me feel seen. 2 years ago, he passed away. I was across the country in the final, grueling year of my doctorate program. I was devastated, a hollowed-out feeling that I couldn't shake. My mom called me with the funeral details. "It's Friday afternoon, honey," she'd said. 2 p.m. Don't worry. That gives you plenty of time. I booked the first flight I could, a ridiculously expensive red-eye that landed at dawn. I didn't sleep. I rented a car and drove 3 hours through the fog, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I kept replaying our last phone call in my head, searching for a sign, a clue that it would be the last. I pulled into the church parking lot at 1:30 p.m., my suit wrinkled, my eyes burning from exhaustion. And the parking lot was empty, a profound, chilling emptiness. I ran to the heavy oak doors and pulled. Locked. A janitor, an old man with kind eyes, was coming around the side of the building. "Can I help you, son?" "The funeral," I panted, my breath catching. "The Whitman funeral?" He looked at me with pity. "Oh, that was this morning. Finished up around 11. It was a beautiful service. The world tilted on its axis. I called my mom, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "The service? It was this morning?" "Oh, honey," she'd said, her voice like syrup. "Yes, Didn't you get our message? We had to move it up. We tried to call you about the change. You must not have gotten it. But there was no missed call. No voicemail. Just a lie delivered so smoothly, so casually. She'd wanted me to be late. She'd wanted me to look like the grandson who was too busy, too important, too other to even show up for his own grandfather's funeral. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a move so cruel and calculated it took my breath away. And I let her get away with it. I didn't scream. I didn't call her a liar. I just swallowed the lump of grief and betrayal in my throat and whispered, "Okay, Mom." It was easier than fighting. It was always easier. "Alex." Harold Keene's voice pulled me back to the present, out of the swirling vortex of the past. He was looking at me, his expression unreadable. I gave a slight nod, my throat too tight to speak. My family was still staring at the envelope like it was a viper, poised to strike. I had to get out of there, just for a second. I mumbled something about the restroom and stumbled out of the conference room. The hallway felt a mile long. I leaned against the cool marble wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at my reflection in the polished surface of the elevator doors. A tired, defeated man. A part of me, the part that had been conditioned for 30 years, screamed at me to just leave, to walk away, get in my car, drive back to my quiet life, my orderly lab, the only place I felt competent. It would be easier. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A lifeline. It was Ethan, my oldest friend. We grew up on the same dirt road, catching frogs in the creek behind my grandfather's farm. He was the only person from my hometown I still talked to regularly. I answered, my voice hoarse. "Hey man, you out yet? How'd it go?" I couldn't form the words at first. I just let out a long, shuddering breath that sounded suspiciously like a sob. "Whoa, that bad? Huh." I told him everything. The 10 million for Ryan. The crushing dismissal. The casual cruelty of the go earn your own line. The years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. It all just poured out, the bitterness, the humiliation, the sheer exhaustion of it all. Ethan was quiet on the other end. He just listened, letting me empty myself of the poison. When I was done, he didn't offer me flimsy platitudes or pity. He offered me something much better, anger. "Man, that's messed up. Seriously, Alex. But that thing with the funeral, I never told you this, but my mom thought that was real shady at the time. A whole other level of cruel." "I know," I whispered. Did you ever really think they did it on purpose?" The question hung there between us, the one I had pushed down and refused to look at for 2 years. "I don't know. Maybe. It seems too evil." "Is it?" Ethan pressed, his voice gentle but firm. "Think about it, man. Your grandpa was your biggest fan. He was always telling my dad about your papers, bragging about his genius grandson. Maybe they didn't want him talking to you. Maybe they didn't want him." He trailed off, letting me connect the dots. "Leaving me something?" I finished for him. A cold dread, sharp and sickening, seeped into my bones. It wasn't just a possibility. It felt like the truth. "I'm just saying," Ethan said. "Look, you can't let them win like this. You can't let them write you off and just walk away. It's not what Walter would have wanted." His words struck a chord deep inside me. He was right. Running away was what they expected me to do. It was what I'd always done. But not today. An idea, a desperate long shot, sparked in my mind. "Ethan, do you still talk to George?" Old man George. The guy who used to be the groundskeeper at my grandpa's farm. "George Carter?" "Yeah, I see him at the diner for breakfast most mornings. Salt of the earth, that guy." "Why?" "I need you to ask him something for me. It's important. Ask him if he ever noticed anything strange about my mail, or my parents talking about me to Grandpa." "On it," Ethan said without hesitation. I hung up, my mind racing. George had been fiercely loyal to my grandfather. He'd worked for him for 30 years. If anyone knew anything, it was him. A few agonizing minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was Ethan. "Okay, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice low. "I just got off the phone with him. George says he's felt bad for years. He says he distinctly remembers your mom coming out to the burn barrel a few years back with a whole stack of letters. Your letters. He saw your name on the return address. She told him it was just old college junk you'd asked her to get rid of. He also said he overheard your dad on the phone with your grandpa once, telling him that you were too busy with your important city life to come visit. George said Walter sounded heartbroken. He's so sorry, Alex. He was afraid he'd lose his job if he said anything. I stared at the screen, the words blurring through a fresh wave of white-hot anger. It wasn't just neglect. It was a systematic campaign. It was sabotage, deliberate, calculated, and breathtakingly cruel. They had actively worked to sever the connection between me and the one person in my family who truly saw me, who truly believed in me. That was it. The last thread of familial duty, of scared little boy deference I had ever felt, snapped. I pushed myself off the wall. I walked back down that long hallway, my steps sure and steady. I pushed open the heavy door to the conference room and walked back in. My posture was different. My shoulders were back. My hands were steady. I looked straight at my father, then my mother. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve that felt like steel in my veins. I wasn't there to receive anything anymore. I was there to claim what was mine. I sat down, my movements deliberate. I looked at Harold Keene. "Go on, Harold," I said, my voice clear and strong, cutting through the tense silence. "Open it." Harold Keene looked from my face to the tense, expectant faces of my parents, sensing the profound shift that had occurred in the hallway. He picked up a small, ornate silver letter opener from his desk and slid it carefully under the dark red wax seal. The faint crackle of the aging paper breaking was like a gunshot in the silent room. He unfolded a 2-page, handwritten letter and a more formal, typewritten document, a codicil to the will. He put on his reading glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read from the formal document first. The legalese was dense, a thicket of heretofores and whereas. But the core meaning was brutally, beautifully clear. All property, assets, buildings, and intellectual holdings associated with the Whitman Research Annex, including the primary laboratory building, the adjacent support structures, the surrounding 20 acres of farmland, all equipment therein, and all patents, both pending and granted, that have resulted from work conducted at said facility, I bequeath solely and without encumbrance to my grandson, Dr. Alex Whitman. A sharp, strangled gasp came from my mother. It was a sound I had never heard her make before. Ryan's jaw, which had been set in a line of smug satisfaction, literally dropped open. His face went slack with disbelief. The annex, my grandfather's private passion project, a state-of-the-art research lab he'd built on the far side of the farm property. I thought he'd donated it to the local university years ago. My parents had told me as much, explaining it away as a sensible tax write-off. Another lie, one of hundreds, all neatly stacked to build the prison of my reality. Harold wasn't finished. He took a sip of water, letting the weight of the first revelation settle. Then he continued. Furthermore, upon my death, all remaining liquid assets, including all monies held in savings and checking accounts, and the entirety of my stock and bond portfolio, are to be liquidated and the resulting sum divided equally, share and share alike, between my 2 grandsons, Ryan Whitman and Alex Whitman. The silence that followed this time was different. It wasn't tense. It was explosive. It was the dead, heavy calm before a lightning strike. My father's carefully cultivated tan seemed to drain from his face, leaving behind a pale, sickly gray. My mother's perfectly painted mask of composure was cracking, her lipsticked mouth a thin, hard, bloodless line. Ryan was the first to detonate, but his rage wasn't directed at me. He shot up from his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting on his trembling frame. He pointed a shaking finger not at me, but at our parents. "You lied to me," he yelled, his voice cracking with a mix of fury and petulant betrayal. "You told me it was all mine. The whole thing. You said Grandpa saw Alex as a lost cause. A screw-up. You said he trusted your judgment." My father shot to his feet, his face a thundercloud. "Ryan," Sit down and be quiet. This is not the place for this discussion. No, I won't be quiet. Ryan was almost hysterical now, the golden boy tarnishing before our very eyes. You've been telling me for years how I was the one who would take over, the one who deserved it. You told me the Aspen trip was covered. You said the down payment on the condo was a sure thing. Once the estate cleared. Was that all a lie too? And there it was. The ugly, pathetic truth, spilled out onto the polished mahogany table for all to see. It wasn't just about favoring Ryan out of some misguided belief in his superiority. It was about their own deep, desperate financial troubles. They had seen my grandfather's legacy not as something to be honored, but as their personal ATM, their bailout package, with me as the small, acceptable bit of collateral damage. My mother, for once in her life, was utterly speechless. She just stared at her perfect creation, her golden boy, who was now publicly immolating her with the truth. And then, another voice cut through the chaos. It was quiet, frail, but it carried a weight that silenced everyone. It was sharp as a razor. Richard, Eleanor. We all turned. My grandmother, Margaret, who had been a silent, almost invisible presence in the corner of the room, was now the center of gravity. She was looking at her son and daughter-in-law, and the gentle, hazy softness I'd always associated with her was gone. In its place was a terrifying clarity. Walter called me on Alex's birthday last year, she said, her voice trembling slightly, but with a cold anger, not weakness. He was so hurt. He said he'd tried to call his grandson all day and couldn't get through. He'd sent a package that was never acknowledged. She paused, her gaze sweeping over my parents. You told me Alex was just busy, that he was on some important research trip and couldn't be bothered. You said he'd gotten too big for his roots. She looked at me then, a long, searching look, and I could see the pieces clicking into place in her mind. Years of small lies, strange excuses, and casual dismissals were suddenly forming a single horrifying picture. It wasn't him, was it? She whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. It was you. All along it was you. You kept them apart. My mother started to stammer, her usual glibness failing her. Margaret, you don't understand the complexities. Oh, I understand perfectly now, my grandmother said, her voice rising with a strength and authority I had never, ever heard from her. She pushed herself up from her chair, her back, usually slightly stooped, now ramrod straight. I have sat by and watched you poison this family for too long. I watched you belittle one grandson and inflate the other with false praise. I thought it was just misguided love, poor judgment. But this, she gestured to the will, to me, to the whole ugly scene. This is greed. This is theft. This is cruel. She took a slow, deliberate step toward them. I need to think, she said, her voice shaking with the force of her revelation. I need to think about what this family even is anymore. And I need to do it in peace. Her eyes, burning with a righteous fire, locked onto my father. I want you out of my house, both of you, and take your son with you. She gestured towards Ryan, who now just looked like a deflated balloon. I want you gone by tonight. My father's face was a mask of pure disbelief. Mother, you can't be serious. That is our home. No, she said, her voice as final as a gavel strike. It's my home. It was Walter's home. And you have dishonored his memory in it for the very last time. Without another word, she turned, a woman of newfound iron, and walked slowly out of the room. The fight had drained out of my parents. They were just defeated. My father shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, a look that promised this wasn't over. Then they grabbed Ryan, who was still muttering about condos and broken promises, and shuffled out of the office, a toxic cloud of failure and disgrace hanging over them. Harold Keene let out a long, slow breath. He turned to the second page, the handwritten letter from my grandfather. His voice was soft now. He wanted me to read this to you, Alex. Alone. He passed the letter across the table. The paper was thick, creamy, and the handwriting was my grandfather's, a familiar, spidery scrawl that I knew as well as my own. My dearest Alex, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it also means you have likely just endured one last painful test from your family. I am so very sorry for that. I wish it hadn't been necessary, but I had to know. I had to know if the boy I raised, the boy with the insatiably curious mind and the fundamentally kind heart, was still in there. I had to know if they had finally managed to break your spirit. I see now they have not. Your father sees value only in dollars and cents. Your brother sees value only in status and applause. They are blind to true worth. But I was never blind, Alex. Not when it came to you. I saw you. I saw your passion. I saw your brilliance. I saw your integrity, a quality they wouldn't recognize if it was printed on a stock certificate. While they were chasing shadows, you were studying the very building blocks of life. Don't ever again let them or anyone convince you that your work is worthless. It is the most worthy pursuit of all. The annex is yours. It's more than just a building. It's a legacy. My legacy. And now yours. Do with it what you know in your heart is right. Build something that lasts. Create something that matters. Don't do it for the money. Lord knows that's never been your motivation. Don't do it for revenge. It's a bitter meal. Do it for the joy of discovery. Do it for the 12-year-old boy who built that beautiful DNA model and won the science fair. I have always been, and will always be, so incredibly proud of you. All my love, Grandpa Walter. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases, my hands trembling. The tears I'd held back for years, the ones I'd swallowed in the face of 1,000 slights, finally fell. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of profound relief, of validation, of finally being seen. I looked up at Harold, the letter clutched in my hand like a lifeline. He pushed a set of old, heavy brass keys across the polished table. The keys to the annex. I took them. They felt heavy in my hand, heavy with responsibility, with grief, and with a new, unfamiliar feeling that was starting to burn brightly within me. Purpose. My father's final, hateful look was burned into my mind. He'd promised to fight. Holding those keys, looking at my grandfather's words, I made a silent promise. To him and to myself. Let them try. The next day, I drove out to the farm. The landscape of my childhood. I bypassed the main farmhouse, my grandmother's new fortress of solitude, and took the long, winding gravel path that led to the Whitman Research Annex. I hadn't been back on this path in over a decade. I remembered riding my bike down it, a wild kid with scraped knees. From a distance, the annex looked just as I remembered. A simple, elegant, modern-looking building of dark cedar and smoked glass, nestled in a grove of ancient oak trees. It looked out of place, a piece of the future dropped into the past, a testament to my grandfather's forward-thinking mind. The heavy brass key, cool against my skin, slid into the lock with a satisfying, solid click. I pushed the door open. The air inside was cool and still, a time capsule smelling of dust, old books, and the faint, clean, metallic scent of ozone. Sunlight streamed through the large, floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating millions of floating dust motes like tiny, swirling galaxies. It was a ghost of a place, but a beautiful one. The main lab was filled with long benches and equipment, all of it top of the line from about 15 years ago, now draped in white cloths like sleeping giants. It was a scientist's paradise, waiting to be awakened. In the small, glass-walled office off the main lab, I found his desk. Everything was neat, orderly, everything in its place, just like him. On the wall was a large corkboard, still pinned with old articles, charts, and a faded photograph of a much younger me, grinning with a missing front tooth, holding a frog I'd caught in the creek. I ran my hand over the back of his worn leather chair. I could almost see him sitting there, looking out the window at the fields, a cup of steaming black coffee beside him. I opened a file cabinet. It wasn't filled with bills or tax records. It was filled with his mind. Meticulously organized folders held his notes, detailed records of experiments, and binders thick with research papers he'd found interesting. And in one folder, labeled simply Ideas, I found sketches and proposals for projects he never got to start. It was a treasure trove. One caught my eye, a folder thicker than the rest, drought-resistant seed project for the community. It wasn't just an idea. It was a comprehensive plan. He'd laid out a multi-phase strategy to use new genetic modification techniques to develop strains of corn and soy that could survive with significantly less water. His stated goal, right on the first page, was to help the small, local family farms in our county, farms that were always one bad summer away from going under. It was brilliant. It was practical. It was meaningful. It was a legacy waiting to be brought to life. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a spark of genuine, unadulterated excitement. This wasn't just a building. It was a mission. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in my bones, that I was the only person who could complete it. But a mission needs an army, even a small one. I spent the next week drafting a detailed research plan and posting a job opening on a few niche university research boards. I was brutally honest. The pay was modest, the location was rural, but the scientific freedom was absolute and the work had the potential to be genuinely impactful. I didn't expect much of a response. A week later, I had 2 interviews scheduled via video call. Tara and Micah. They were both finishing their postdocs at a major university in the city, and they were brilliant. They were sharp, energetic, and they radiated a passion for applied science that matched my own. "So, let me get this straight," Micah said. Leaning so close to his camera I could see the excitement in his eyes. "There's no university board to appease? No corporate sponsor demanding quarterly reports and a marketable product by Q4? We'd be free to pursue the research wherever it leads. As long as it's good, sound science," I affirmed. Tara, on the other screen, grinned. "This is incredible. It's a scientist's dream. A fully equipped sandbox with a real, tangible purpose. Most of us spend our careers fighting for grant money to do research that might have an application in 20 years. This is now." They didn't see a dusty, forgotten lab in the middle of nowhere. They saw what I saw, what my grandfather had seen. Potential. I hired them on the spot. They arrived 2 weeks later, and we spent the next month bringing the lab back to life. The work was hard, grueling, but deeply invigorating. We cleaned, we calibrated, we tested, and we ordered new reagents. The place began to hum with a new energy, the quiet hum of machinery and the louder hum of excited, collaborative minds. We were building something, but while I was building, my family was plotting. The first shot across the bow was a thick, creamy envelope that arrived via courier. It was from a high-powered, notoriously aggressive law firm in the city. The letter was cold, formal, and swimming in legal jargon, but the message was simple and ugly. They were contesting the will. They were filing a suit claiming my grandfather was not of sound mind when he wrote the codicil and that I, his estranged grandson, had exerted undue influence over him. It was a complete and utter lie, and a flimsy one at that, but I knew that wasn't the point. The point was to drag me into a legal battle that would be long, draining, and crushingly expensive, designed to bleed me dry before I could even begin. Ethan sent me the next shot. It was a link to an article in the County Chronicle. The headline read, "Local farming family torn apart by inheritance dispute." The article was a masterpiece of manipulation, featuring a long, tearful interview with my mother. "We just don't understand," she was quoted as saying, her words dripping with manufactured pain and concern. "Alex was always a sensitive boy. He's a brilliant academic, of course we are proud. But he's never been interested in the family or the farm. For him to come in and seize control of Walter's legacy, a place that was meant to benefit the entire community, for his own selfish, esoteric projects, it's heartbreaking. We're just so worried about him." My hands clenched the phone, my knuckles turning white. She was painting me as a greedy, unstable, ivory tower recluse who'd stolen a community resource from his salt-of-the-earth family. It was a classic smear campaign, designed to poison the well, to turn the community against me before I even had a chance to introduce myself. I immediately called Harold Keene, my voice tight with rage. "They're trying to ruin me. They're making me out to be some kind of monster." "I know, Alex," he said calmly. His steadiness was a balm on my fury. "This is how they fight. It's ugly. but it's also a sign of profound weakness. They wouldn't be resorting to public mudslinging if their legal case had any merit. So what do I do? Just sit here and let them lie about me to everyone? No, Harold said, and I could hear a smile in his voice. You fight back, but you fight smart. I've been going through your grandfather's files from the office. He documented everything. Emails, letters, even handwritten notes from his phone calls. He knew this might happen. He was preparing to protect his legacy, and you. He paused. I'm sending you a package overnight. It's your ammunition. In the meantime, I have an idea. It's time you stopped being a defendant and started acting like the man in charge of the Whitman Annex. 2 days later, a process server walked up the long driveway of my parents' suburban home and served them with a letter from my lawyer. It was a cease and desist order, formally demanding they stop their campaign of public defamation and print a full retraction in the County Chronicle. If they failed to do so, I would file a countersuit against them for slander and libel. The ball was in their court, and I knew they were too proud, too arrogant, and too desperate to back down. The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break. The deposition wasn't held in a grand, wood-paneled courtroom. It took place in a sterile, soulless conference room at the opposing law firm's high-rise office. The long, polished table reflected the grim faces of everyone present. On one side sat my parents and my brother, flanked by their expensive lawyer, a man named Sterling who had the slicked-back hair, predatory smile, and cold, dead eyes of a shark. On my side, there was just me and Harold Keene, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the buzzing anxiety on the other side of the table. The air was thick with a toxic mix of animosity and dread. My mother refused to look at me, focusing on arranging and rearranging the neat stack of files in front of her. My father stared straight at me, his jaw tight, a tiny muscle twitching uncontrollably in his cheek. Ryan just looked miserable, slumped in his chair like a kid who'd been dragged to a parent-teacher conference he knew he was going to fail. The goal of a deposition is to gather information before a trial, to lock in testimonies. Sterling's strategy became clear from his very first question. Paint me as an ungrateful, incompetent, and opportunistic son who had taken advantage of a vulnerable old man. Dr. Whitman, Sterling began, his voice as smooth and synthetic as silk. It's a fact, is it not, that you had not physically visited your grandfather in, the last 3 years of his life? I was completing my PhD program and a subsequent postdoctoral fellowship on the other side of the country, I said calmly, just as Harold had coached me. It was a demanding period. However, I spoke with my grandfather on the phone regularly. Or so you claim, Sterling said with a slight, condescending sneer. We have subpoenaed phone records. We have found no record of these calls from your number to his. That's likely because my parents often told me he was unavailable or sleeping when I called, I said, looking directly at my mother. I saw a flicker of raw panic in her eyes before she smoothed it over with a practiced mask of indignation. And as I later found out, the dozens of letters I sent to him were unfortunately misplaced before he had a chance to read them. Sterling waved a dismissive hand, as if my words were gnats to be swatted away. Let's talk about this research you do, Dr. Whitman. Is it true that in your entire 10-year academic career, your work has never earned a significant income? My work is in foundational science, I replied, my voice steady. Its value isn't measured in quarterly earnings reports or stock prices. It's measured in discovery, in the expansion of human knowledge. It's a value my grandfather, a man who built and funded his own private research annex, understood perfectly. Sterling smirked, sensing a kill. An annex you had no knowledge of until the will was read. Correct? An annex you showed no interest in whatsoever. How can you possibly claim to be the rightful heir to a legacy you didn't even know existed? This was it, the heart of their case, the narrative they had carefully constructed. The out-of-touch, ivory tower grandson swooping in to steal a local treasure. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the cool, polished surface of the table. That's where you're mistaken, Mr. Sterling. I opened my own file, and from it, I produced not a legal document, but a worn, leather-bound journal. It was my grandfather's. Harold had sent it to me in that overnight package. It was his research journal from the last 5 years of his life. I saw my father's eyes widen in recognition. He knew that journal. He had likely dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man. On page 47, I continued, my voice clear and confident, not needing to look. My grandfather outlines the initial framework for the drought-resistant seed project, a project he discussed with me at length during a phone call on May 12, 2 years ago. He was particularly excited about the potential of using the new CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing technology, a technique that was, coincidentally, the central focus of my doctoral thesis. He wanted my input on the methodology. I flipped a few pages, the soft rustle of the paper the only sound in the room. On page 58, he details a conversation we had about retrofitting the lab's mass spectrometers. He even jotted down the name of the supplier I recommended, a specialty firm in Boston. And on page 72, right here, I tapped the page. In his own unmistakable handwriting is a note. Need to talk to Alex about collaborating full-time. He sees the big picture. He gets it. I pushed the journal across the gleaming table. It slid to a stop directly in front of Sterling. I didn't know my name was on the will for the annex, Mr. Sterling, because my grandfather and I were already making plans to work there together. This wasn't an inheritance I was waiting for. It was a partnership that was stolen from us by lies and interference. The room was utterly silent. Sterling stared at the open journal, his slick confidence gone, replaced by a dumbfounded expression. My mother looked like she was going to be physically sick. But I wasn't done. I had been on the defensive my whole life. Not anymore. You claim I'm incompetent, I said, my voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. Yet I am the only person in this room who has the training, the knowledge, and the passion to understand the science this facility was built for. You claim I'm an opportunist. Yet I am the only one in this room trying to fulfill my grandfather's actual, documented wishes for this community. Not just liquidate his assets to pay off years of irresponsible spending and personal debt. Ryan flinched as if I'd physically slapped him. My father's face was turning a dangerous shade of mottled red. This is circumstantial. Sterling finally stammered, trying to regain control, to find his footing on ground that was rapidly crumbling beneath him. It doesn't prove anything malicious. You're right, I said, cutting him off with surgical precision. It doesn't prove they deliberately lied. It just proves I was the rightful intellectual heir. But this, I paused, letting the moment hang in the air. This proves the malice. I slid another document across the table. It was a single, simple page, a sworn affidavit. That, I said, my voice as cold and hard as ice, is a statement from Mr. George Carter, your family's former groundskeeper of 35 years. In it, he testifies, under penalty of perjury, that he personally witnessed my mother, Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, destroying my personal mail in a burn barrel. He also testifies that he overheard my father, Mr. Richard Whitman, on multiple occasions, lying to my grandfather about my availability and my willingness to speak with him. He is prepared to repeat these statements in a court of law. Harold Keene, who had been silent this whole time, leaned forward. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. We have a man with an impeccable reputation in your community, a loyal employee of over 3 decades, willing to testify in open court that your clients engaged in a deliberate, multi-year campaign of fraudulent interference and deception to isolate Walter Whitman from his grandson for their own direct financial gain. Now, Mr. Sterling, Harold said, his eyes locking with the other lawyers. How do you think a jury of their neighbors will react to that? Checkmate. Sterling looked at the affidavit. He looked at the panicked, guilty faces of his clients. He looked back at the affidavit. He slowly, deliberately closed his file folder. He knew he didn't have a case. He had a public relations nightmare, a potential countersuit he couldn't possibly win, and the specter of criminal charges for mail fraud. It was over. The fight wasn't won with a dramatic, last-minute reveal in front of a cheering crowd. It was won here, in this quiet, sterile room with truth, with diligence, and with preparation. It was won with my grandfather's words and my own resolve. And that was a victory that felt solid, real, and completely satisfyingly mine. The drive back from the city was the quietest, most peaceful drive of my life. The relentless knot of anxiety that had been sitting in the pit of my stomach for months, for years really, had finally dissolved. It wasn't just the relief of the legal victory. It was the profound satisfaction of having faced them, of having spoken my truth, armed with facts they simply could not dispute or wriggle out of. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't screamed. I had simply presented the truth, and the truth had been enough. The next morning, Harold called, his voice brimming with a professional satisfaction that was more rewarding than any cheer. "They're dropping the lawsuit, Alex. Sterling called me an hour ago. He's advising them to cut their losses and retreat." Apparently, the prospect of having Mr. Carter testify in open court about a bonfire of your personal letters was highly persuasive. "And the slander?" I asked, thinking of the vicious newspaper article. "He assures me his clients will cease all public commentary immediately. I suspect they won't be showing their faces at the country club for a long time," Harold added with a dry chuckle. "They're going to crawl back under their rock, Alex. You won." The word "won" still felt strange. It didn't feel like a fist-pumping, champagne-popping celebration. It just felt quiet, still, like the deep, cleansing calm after a long and violent storm. The damage was done. The wreckage of our family was scattered all around me, but the storm itself had passed. The air was clean. A few days later, Ethan called. He was a terrible gossip, which was one of his most endearing qualities. "You are not going to believe this," he said, barely containing his glee. "The talk of the town. Richard Whitman had to sell his boat. You know, the Golden Boy? Apparently, the down payment for Sterling's retainer pretty much wiped them out. And I heard from my cousin who works at the golf course that their membership is under review for conduct unbecoming." Hearing it provided a satisfying, tangible sense of consequence, a feeling that the world, for once, had balanced its books. And the best part was, I hadn't had to do anything to make it happen. Their own actions had brought their carefully constructed world crashing down. That weekend, a car I recognized as my grandmother's pulled up the long driveway to the annex. I met her on the porch, a fresh pot of coffee brewing inside. She looked older than she had a few weeks ago, the stress of it all having carved new lines on her face, but her eyes were clear. We stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the rustling of the old oak leaves in the autumn breeze. "Harold told me what happened at that meeting," she said finally, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "He told me what you showed them. He told me about George." "I'm sorry you had to be pulled into all of this, Grandma," I said softly. She finally turned to me, and her eyes, the same blue as my grandfather's, were filled with a deep, profound sadness and regret. "No, Alex, I am the one who is sorry. I was there all those years. I saw it happening. I saw how they treated you, how they dismissed your passions. And I told myself it was just how they were. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere in how a son raises his children. I was a coward." A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek, and she didn't bother to wipe it away. A mother is supposed to protect her children, and a grandmother is supposed to protect them all. I failed you, and in my silence, I failed Walter. "You didn't fail him," I said, my voice thick. "You stood up for him at the end. You stood up for what was right." She shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "Far too late. But maybe not too late to do one last thing right." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a set of keys, much newer than the old brass keys to the annex. They were the keys to the main farmhouse, the home she had shared with my grandfather for 50 years. "I'm moving into the guest house by the creek," she said, pressing the keys firmly into my hand. Her hand was cool and dry. "It's smaller, easier for an old woman to manage. The farm, the main house, it needs a steward. It needs a beating heart again. It needs someone with a vision, with a connection to the land and the future. It needs Walter's true heir." I stared at the keys in my palm, the weight of them feeling immense. "Grandma, I can't," This is your home. It was our home, she corrected gently but firmly, a flash of the iron-willed woman from the lawyer's office returning. And Walter's spirit isn't in those empty rooms anymore. It's here. She gestured toward the humming laboratory. It's in the work you're doing. Your projects, the ones you're starting, they will honor his love for this land. They will help this community he cared so much about. That is the legacy. Not the money, not the house. The work. Now take the keys. No arguments. I closed my hand around them, the metal biting into my skin. She gave me a small, watery smile, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in a long time. Good. Now I hear you have some clever young people working for you. I baked a pie, an apple pie, Walter's favorite recipe. I thought they might be hungry after a long day of being brilliant. As I watched her walk back to her car, her steps a little lighter, I realized the power shift was complete. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a moral one. The old guard had abdicated. The house, the farm, the future, it was all in my hands now. The thought was equal parts terrifying and liberating. I had lost the family I thought I had, but in its place, I had gained a legacy. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt truly ready to carry it. The next 18 months were a whirlwind, a blur of hard work, sleepless nights, small, frustrating failures, and breathtaking, exhilarating breakthroughs. Life settled into a new rhythm, one dictated not by family obligations and unspoken resentments, but by the seasons of planting and the meticulous, rewarding pace of research. The annex, once a silent, dusty monument to the past, was now a vibrant hub of activity, a place humming with the future. Our drought-resistant corn strain was an unqualified success. We ran a pilot program with 5 local farms, including Ethan's. That summer was brutally hot and dry, the kind of summer that usually broke the backs of small farmers. But our crops thrived. The stalks stood tall and green while neighboring fields looked parched and yellowed. Word spread like wildfire through the tight-knit farming community. Farmers who had once looked at me with suspicion at the local diner, their opinions colored by my family's insidious lies, were now stopping me by my truck, their skepticism replaced by a genuine, hopeful curiosity. One of them was a man named Henderson, the head of the local co-op, who had been my most vocal public critic. He showed up at the lab one day, hat in hand, and asked if he could put his name down for next year's seeds. It was a quiet, powerful victory. The kids' Saturday science program became my favorite part of the week. Every Saturday morning, a dozen or so kids from the surrounding rural areas, kids who didn't have access to the kinds of resources city schools took for granted, would pile into the annex. We'd do experiments that fizzed and bubbled, build surprisingly effective robots out of junk parts, and launch model rockets in the open fields. Seeing the look of pure wonder on a 12-year-old girl's face, a bright, quiet girl named Clara who reminded me so much of myself at that age, as she looked through a high-powered microscope for the very first time, that was a feeling $10 million could never, ever buy. We weren't just growing crops, we were growing curiosity. We were building a community. My grandmother thrived in her new role as the matriarch in residence. She frequently dropped by with freshly baked pies and sharp, insightful advice, becoming a surrogate grandmother to Tara and Micah. As for my parents, I only heard about them through the town grapevine. They had sold their oversized house in the wealthy suburb and moved into a small, nondescript condo. Their debts, it turned out, were far worse than I had ever imagined. They had been living a lie for years, and now, without my grandfather's fortune to prop them up, their carefully constructed world had crumbled. They were ghosts in the town they once felt they ran. One chilly afternoon in the fall, I was helping Tara and Micah unload a shipment of new lab supplies when a beat-up, 10-year-old pickup truck I didn't recognize pulled into the long gravel driveway. A man got out. He was thinner than I remembered, his expensive, tailored clothes replaced by worn-out jeans and a faded, frayed work shirt. His hands, shoved into his pockets, were calloused and stained. Took me a second to realize it was Ryan. My first instinct was suspicion, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. My hand tightened on the cardboard box I was holding. Tara and Micah, ever perceptive, sensed the immediate tension and stopped what they were doing, watching us. He didn't approach the lab. He just stood by his truck, looking uncertain, his usual easy swagger completely gone. He looked diminished. He looked lost. I set the box down and walked over to him, keeping a careful, deliberate distance. "Ryan, what are you doing here?" He looked at the dusty ground for a long moment, then finally met my eyes. The arrogance that had been his defining feature his entire life was gone. In its place was a deep, hollowed-out shame. "I saw an article in the paper," he said, his voice raspy and used, "about the program for the kids. The seed project. Everything." He took a shaky breath. "I lost it all, Alex. The money from Dad and Mom, the 10 million. It was gone in 6 months. A couple of bad investments trying to prove I could do it on my own. I got a job in construction, pouring concrete." He looked down at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "It's the first honest work I've done in my life, I think." He looked up at the annex, at the warm lights on inside, at the sound of faint laughter from one of the kids who was still there, working on a project. "I was wrong," he said, the words coming out in a painful rush. "About everything. About you. About Grandpa. About what matters. I spent my whole damn life chasing what Dad and Mom told me was important. Money, status, looking good. And it was all empty. It was all just air." He looked back at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You're building something real here, Alex. Something that lasts. Something that Grandpa would be so proud of." He swallowed hard, the sound sharp in the quiet afternoon. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. I wouldn't if I were you. But I came here today to ask if I could help. Not for pay. Not for anything. Just to help. I can sweep the floors. I can stack boxes. I can mow the lawn. Anything. I want to be a part of something real for once in my damn life." I stared at him, my mind a whirlwind. The old Alex, the wounded 12-year-old, would have laughed in his face, would have told him to get lost and enjoy the life he'd chosen. The old Alex would have savored this moment, this complete reversal of fortunes. But I wasn't the old Alex anymore. The past 18 months had changed me, too. I had learned that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I couldn't forget what he did. I couldn't erase the years of taunts, the casual cruelty, the smugness in that lawyer's office. That would always be a part of our history, a scar that would never fully fade. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be our entire future. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a feeling. It wasn't a magic wand. It was a choice. A difficult, complicated, daily choice. "Why now, Ryan?" I asked, my voice even. "Why should I believe you?" He looked at me and his answer was simple, honest, and devoid of excuses. "Because I've got nothing left to lie for." I thought for a long moment. "The main storage warehouse is a disaster," I said finally, my voice flat, professional. "It needs to be completely inventoried and reorganized. It's a big job. It's heavy, dirty work. You can start there. Tomorrow. 8 a.m. Don't be late." A look of stunned disbelief, followed by a wave of profound, bone-deep relief, washed over his face. He just nodded, unable to speak. He got back in his beat-up truck and drove away, and I stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle on the gravel road, feeling the cool autumn air on my face. I didn't know if it was the right decision. I didn't know if he could truly change. But I knew I had to give him the chance. For him, and maybe just a little bit for me too. A few months later, on a clear, cold winter night, I was sitting on the porch of the main house, the house that was finally starting to feel like my own. It was on a heavy oak bench my grandfather had built with his own hands, the wood worn smooth and familiar over the years. The stars were brilliant out here, away from the city lights, a vast, silent canopy of diamond dust. It was the same sky he had looked at every night. From across the fields, I could see the warm lights of the annex, a beacon of purpose in the darkness. Inside, I knew our work continued even late into the night. Down the path, a single light flicked on in the small, simple apartment we'd fixed up above the garage. Ryan was living there now. He'd shown up every day at 8 a.m. on the dot. He'd reorganized the entire warehouse, repaired miles of old fences, and had never once complained. He was quiet, he was humble. Last week, I'd come into the lab on a Saturday and seen him patiently showing Clara how to solder a circuit board for her robotics project. His large, clumsy-looking hands were surprisingly gentle and steady. He was good with the kids. They liked him. He was finding a new kind of value, one not measured in dollars, but in patience and usefulness. Our relationship wasn't what it was. Could never be. There was too much history, too many scars for that. We weren't the close, easy brothers we had never been. But it was something new, something quiet and tentative. A shared purpose, a fragile truce. We were two broken pieces of the same family, trying to build something better and stronger on the ruins of the old one. I thought about my grandfather's letter, the words now committed to memory. He told me not to act out of revenge. He was so right. Revenge is a fire that consumes you from the inside out, leaving you with nothing but ash. But building something, creating something, that's a fire that warms you, a fire that lights the way forward. He didn't just leave me a lab and some money. He left me a choice to remain a victim of my past or to become the architect of my future. Looking up at the stars he used to watch, I finally truly understood the nature of his legacy. It wasn't the property or the patents or the portfolio. It was the unwavering belief that one person, armed with curiosity and integrity, could make a difference. He gave me the keys to a building, but in doing so, he gave me back the keys to my own life. And that is an inheritance beyond any price, a treasure beyond any measure. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was long, but I appreciate you sticking with me. It's been a hard and complicated journey, but it's one that has taught me so much about family, the true meaning of forgiveness, and what it really means to build a life of value. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight to prove your own worth, even to the people who were supposed to support you the most? I'd love to hear about it. Share your story in the comments below. I promise I read them all. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. You guys take care.